Mrs. Holland. Mrs. Holland. I didn't mean to get you up, Mrs. Holland. Mrs. Holland.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Here we go again.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadrome. This is Burn Power coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia, which is where? Can you find that on a map? I'll give you a hint. It's not in the United States of America. Well, today what we're going to do is give you a few movie recommendations. Now, these are not your standard movie recommendations. I watch an awful lot of channels related to horror on YouTube and such like that. I get a lot out of them. Many of them are made by people much younger than myself, people who are millennials and Gen Z and that sort of thing. People will say under 40, under 35, under 30, under 25. And I noticed something that's very interesting is that they seem to have an idea that horror movies kind of begin around, I don't know, middle of the 70s sometime, maybe with The Exorcist. If they're really informed, they go back to two films in particular, Night of the Living Dead and Psycho. So back to the 1960s and late 50s. But generally, for most younger horror fans, horror seems to start around the 1980s. So you have to be pretty informed. I mean, you know the classics from the 70s, The Omen, The Exorcist, The Shining. Yes, that's a 70s film, really. Alien and such. And then you come to the 1980s and you have all of your franchise entertainments, Nightmare on Elm Street, all the Friday the 13th and Halloweens and that sort of thing. And then slasher films and that sort of thing. And then it gets into the 90s and finally you get to Scream. And that kind of begins the next major epoch, which then turns into the extreme gore films. I'm not using the torture word here because I don't like that title for films because of the second word, torture, P. It's just it's not porn, you know. So, and then you get to the more supernatural films of the teens, and to wherever we are today, which has a lot of body horror. And oddly enough, we have films that are dealing with dolls and puppets and masks and androids, body horror, things like that in the 2020s. So, but what I thought I would do is, one of the things I noticed is that horror has changed. Each generation has different things that make its vibes get weird. You know, make it feel creepy. And in fact, creepy is one of those words that has crept up on us When I was young, creepy literally meant things that creep and crawl on the ground, like snakes and spiders and beetles and worms and things like that. And so, for instance, if you were to say someone was creepy, it is because they gave off this really, really, really dark ground level vibe. They were genuinely a creep. They were like a worm or a spider. And if you look at, there was a magazine called Creepy, came out in the late 1960s, and it was a comic book magazine. This comic book magazine had things that made your flesh crawl. An alternative word for creep or creepy would have been make your flesh crawl. But sometime in the last 30 years, we'll say 30, 40 years, the word creepy has mutated into things that are homemade, like old Halloween costumes and old dolls and puppets, things like that, and just old in particular. So, what was it? I saw someone saying, oh, they used to have telephone books, and the telephone books actually gave away your address and phone number. That's so creepy. I grew up with telephone books. There's nothing creepy about a telephone book. But what that suggests is something subtle has changed. And what it is I think that the younger millennials and Gen Z and certainly Gen Alpha have been surrounded by certain kinds of images and technologies. And these images are often CGI, computer-generated imagery, and they are often highly technical. So people today can no longer imagine the world where you have to have a rotary phone or even a touch-tone phone because everyone's kind of got their own little portable entertainment system going around with them. So the word creepy gets applied to a lot of strange things. Now, I'm not going to go into creepy. I've got a whole video coming out on what happened to creepy and why creepy isn't a bad thing. It's a good thing now. Although it's also way overused as a word to describe, say, older men. Oh my God, I'm creepy. Yeah, who cares? I'll take it. But old things in general. Look at photos of old Halloween costumes before they became predictably molded in very hyper detail. These old, like I once wore a Halloween costume back in the 90s as an adult where I just had a black pillowcase over my head with a couple of eyes and just kind of a dark suit. Now that was creepy in the old school sense of the word. But I'm sure that would also give off the kind of vibes that people get today that's like, ooh, that's so creepy. Well, what I'm going to do here is give you 10 films, and these are just the first 10 that came to my mind. I could think of 10 more, but 10 more antique films that I think at a certain point when I was growing up, they weren't seen as particularly creepy. They might have been seen as weird, even a little scary. But I'm not saying these are scary films. I'm saying these are films that I think younger people today would find extremely fascinating because of how weird they are, how homemade they are, how frightening they are. So these are all horror films, or horror adjacent, but they are films that have imagery that is not going to be at all like the imagery you're used to consuming. I do think about films like Begotten from 1990, or a couple of years ago, Skinamarink, which purposely created this deteriorated scenario. Well, many of these films come by it naturally. That is, say, they're old films. In fact, 4 of the films we're going to be discussing are more than 100 years old. So, let's get into it. Number 1, and we're going to go chronologically. Number 1, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It was directed by Robert Wiener from Germany. And the first 3 films we're doing here are all from Germany in the 1920s, which was an amazing period. I would say any horror film from Germany in the 1920s is going to get under the skin of younger people today in a way it wouldn't have gotten under the skin. I really enjoy them. But I think people today, because they're so used to this perfect imagery, this imagery really now has a new lease on life. So the first one is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, starring Conrad Veidt. For those of you more cinematically literate, you may have seen him as the vicious Nazi officer in Casablanca. It was one of his last films. But he was also in The Man Who Laughs, who has this huge expression, which was the origin of the Joker expression, very directly so. And he plays what's called the somnambulist, the man who just walks around. Now, this film is designed purposely in the expressionistic mold. So all the sets are like hand-painted, and not like a good matte painting where you can't tell the difference between reality. Very purposely hand-painted to look rough, like a stage set, but a really strange stage set. Not only that, the actual angles of the stairs and everything are weird and odd. The somnambulist, who is controlled by the mountebank. A mountebank is the guy who comes around and sells you snake oil and strange potions and has, strange cures and hypnotizes people. Played by Werner Krauss. But the mountebank controls the somnambulist, the sleepwalker. And Conrad Veidt here does this strange thing. He has the oddest makeup on his face. It's not quite clown makeup, but it's not far away either. Very white with black under the eyes. And he slinks around, and the way his movements are very weird. I would say anyone who thought the Slender Man idea was creepy really needs to take a look at this. This is genuinely frightening. And it's frightening because it violates your sense of what is real and what is not. In the sense that everything you're watching is real. Those are quite clearly really painted. Everyone's really acting strangely. And they're doing it for a reason. And in fact, many German films have this expressionistic quality. So that's 1920. That's well over 100 years ago. The next one is from 1922. Nosferatu, which is a Romanian word which means the undead. Again, a German film made by the legendary director F.W. Murnau, who also directed such films. The 1920s version of Faust, the silent version, is an amazing work of art, as is his film The Last Laugh, which is more about Germany as it's warming up for its final degradation in the 1930s. But then he moved to America, seeing the handwriting on the wall, and made a film called Sunrise, which is considered by many to be one of the top 10 silent films of all. But I'm going to say Nosferatu is one of the top 10 silent films of all. It was made in 1922, starring a man by the name of Max Schreck. Was ever an actor more appropriately named? Max, like maximum, Schreck, like Schreck in German means something like fright or fear. And this guy looks like he's a vampire. And in fact, later, E. Elias Merhige made a film, I think it was 2001, where Willem Dafoe plays Max Schreck, who's actually a vampire. And Merhige made one of the darkest, strangest films of all time, Begotten. I'm not going to get into that, but I'll just point that out. But the imagery in Nosferatu is incredible, involving really simple tricks you could do at home. Hint, if you want to make movies, look at these old silent movies. You can do this stuff, and you can make the weirdest films imaginable by looking back at silent movies. But shadow play, sleepwalking. Again, second film featuring sleepwalking. Sleepwalking is really unnerving when you think about it. There's a great story, I've mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again sometime, and I found this in a medical book from the late 19th century called Anomalies in Medical Science. And it tells a story about a woman whose husband is sleepwalking every night. But he comes back and he's always wet. And she doesn't understand. So she stays up, waits until he wakes up, follows him, goes down to the river. They live near a river. He's walking along the side of the river. He goes out, keep in mind, he's sleeping the whole time. He goes out on a log, jumps into the river, and then swims back home. Well, that explains why he's wet. But she realizes after he jumps in the river that he can't swim. And so she says, Hans, whatever his name is, I don't know what country, Bill. And he wakes up and drowns. Sleepwalking. Think about it. Well, vampires. It's basically Dracula. They, in fact, got sued by the Bram Stoker people for using Dracula before Dracula. But there was a great version of it made in 1979 by Werner Herzog, a German, another German director of the German New Wave. And now Robert Eggers, who did The Witch and The Northman, who is absolutely an amazing movie, which too few people saw, is making his version of Nosferatu. Comes out in December of 2024, or sometime around then. See it, but first watch the original, if you can. And then we come to a film called, in English, it's called Warning Shadows, but the full title in German, let's see if I can do this, is Schatten, which means shadows. Eine nachtliche Halluzination. A nocturnal hallucination. This is a strange film. And this is easily, I was going to say this is the most obscure film on the list. There's one more coming up, which I think is even more obscure and better. But it's Warning Shadows is about a shadow puppeteer who arrives at an old mansion and looks like about the middle of the 18th century, end of the 18th century in Germany, arrives and performs what were then called Chinese shadows, Om Chinois, on the wall. And he's predicting what's going to happen in this family. He then hypnotizes them all, puts them all to sleep. You watch their shadows all grow. And then you see this whole play, part of it in reality and part of it is shadows on the wall, where all the darkest things in these people's minds come out. But what's interesting about this character, and it's a character you rarely ever see in films, is he's a dark, mysterious character who's putting people into a spell to do them good. And he does this in order to show them what they're really thinking. And at the end, well, I'll just let you look for it. Look for either Schatten or Warning Shadows. You can find it on YouTube fairly simply. But one thing I would recommend with all of these films is do not watch these films on your phone. Period. You have no business watching films on your phone, for one thing, but you have absolutely no business watching a silent film on your phone. Your phone is just a device of distraction. You should turn it off, and you should just watch the screen. And you should watch these on the best screen, the biggest screen you could find. Turn the lights out and feel it. And in fact, if you've got jokey, ironic friends, do not watch any of these films with them. You want to watch it either with someone who's going to be quiet like you and not disrupting the thing, or you want to watch them alone in the dark at night if you want the full effect. But if you're watching it with people who are going to be laughing and kind of teasing each other while they're watching it or making jokes, you don't want to watch any of these films with these people. These films are not made for these people. So, just get that out of the way. Next. He Who Gets Slapped from 1924. So far we've gone 1920, 1922, 1923, 1924. Am I saying that silent films are great? Yes, I am. And I'm also saying that by the standards of today's young, they are extraordinarily creepy. Wonderfully creepy. Eerie. Dark. Brooding. With strange imagery you've never seen before if you haven't watched these films. He Who Gets Slapped. Well, this is a film for all the people who think clowns are creepy. Now, this film isn't about creepy clowns, but it's going to just be creepy because you now think clowns are creepy. And I say now think because when I was growing up, clowns were never creepy. Fuck you, Stephen King, for helping us all to think that way. Clowns were meant to be funny. I have a book right here on 2 books on clown encyclopedias. You know what? One was made about 1975 and the other in 1980. Neither one mentions clown fear whatsoever. It didn't exist then. And it exists now, and there's no way to put it back in the box. Once you've seen Art the Clown, which I have been watching, you're going to say clowns are creepy. But go back and watch this film. It stars the greatest silent performer in America, Lon Chaney, who could mutate into things. And he did his own makeup. And in this, of course, he's put on clown makeup. But it's all about a man who gets humiliated as a professor and then decides to become a clown. And his whole routine is getting slapped over and over and over. And of course, it's the sad clown version because they didn't have the scary clown yet. But like I said, because we now think clowns are creepy, this whole film is going to feel creepy to you because there are dozens of clowns in here. There are clown parades. There are strange juggling acts with clowns, strange symbolic images of clowns. Absolutely incredible film. Go find He Who Gets Slapped. Again, find it in the best way you can. Buy a Blu-ray if you have to. Going into the talkie era now, we're going to watch Karl Freund's The Mummy. If Freund sounds like a German name, it is. He escaped the coming Nazi takeover of Germany, and he went to America, to Hollywood, and one of the first films he made was this film. He was a cinematographer, but one of the first films he made was The Mummy, starring Boris Karloff. Now, if later the Mummy films were all this kind of beast slowly moving around, but this is not that mummy. This is a man who is an unwrapped mummy who looks really strange, and this is a very mysterious film. And this has elements. Yes, there's Egyptiana, the Art Deco era, which is also, this is 1932, prime Art Deco era, totally influenced by Egyptian art during that period. But what's interesting about this is just the story. And it's the mummy who's been unwrapped, and no one quite knows he's a mummy. He's just this guy with really old, weird skin. And it's Boris Karloff doing, I think, one of his best acting jobs ever. And sometimes he'll look straight into the camera and you feel like you're being hypnotized. And the lighting, Karl Freund knew his expressionist German cinema. The lighting is so strange and surreal. And then he's obsessed with a woman played by Zita Johann, who is a totally obscure actress. And totally obscure actresses from the past are absolutely fascinating because they don't have resonances for us today. But he sees her as the reincarnation of Anxanamen. There's a point where he mentions her name, and he's just sitting there looking at the camera going, Anxanamen, 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 Anxanamen. Genuinely creepy, flesh-crawling creepy.
Anxanamen, Anxanamen, Anxanamen. Is anything the matter? Anxanamen.
The film isn't perfect. There's a couple comic actors in here who probably shouldn't be in here. But overall, it's a symbolist, surrealist masterpiece. Go check that out. The Original Mummy, 1932. Let's go to the 40s now. Val Lewton was a producer who made incredible films. He made about 7 of them for the RKO Pictures. RKO also made King Kong. And so they were flush with money, but they had this cheap wing of their production company, and they gave it to Val Lewton and said, make some B-level horror. And he made some of the best horror films of all in the 1940s. And in fact, when you go into the 1940s, these are the classics. There's some other stuff, there's The Wolfman and stuff, but those are the kind of films we look at today and go, oh, that feels old. These do not. And let me give you 2 of them. One is I Walked with a Zombie. It's from 1943. It was directed by French-American director Jacques Tourneur. Now, Tourneur does some incredible stuff here. Imagine a creepy, dark film set in the tropics, all shot like film noir. And now give it weird percussive backgrounds and strange images. And the zombies here are not your George Romero zombies. These are the old Haitian zombies. Now, we could get into discussing whether this actually reflects zombies and all this other stuff. And in fact, in all these films, yeah, you know what? It's the past. They had different attitudes. But let's not think all of our attitudes are perfect. So I'm sure there will be people in the future who said, this film is from the 2020s, and it has these attitudes about X. And so just get used to it. The past is different. The future will be different. But this is one of the creepiest films ever made. There's a scene where the nurse is leading a woman who is a white woman dressed all in white, and this is very symbolic, through these cane fields, sugar cane fields, in the dark, beneath the moon. And it's just this idea, it's like a Greek tragedy. This woman, she's leading the woman because she has become a zombie. And they meet a zombie called Carrefour, who stands at the crossroads. And he is just one of the most eerie characters you've ever seen in a film. I walked with a zombie. They gave the name to him and said, you have to make a film with this name. But he made a work of art with it.
It seemed only a few days before I met Mr. Holland in Antigua. We boarded the boat for St. Sebastian. It was all just as I'd imagined it. I looked at those great glowing stars. I felt the warm wind on my cheek. I breathed deep, and every bit of me inside myself said, how beautiful.
It's not beautiful.
You read my thoughts, Mr. Holland.
It's easy enough to read the thoughts of a newcomer. Everything seems beautiful because you don't understand. Those flying fish, they're not leaping for joy. They're jumping in terror. Bigger fish want to eat them. That luminous water, it takes its gleam from millions of tiny dead bodies. The glitter of putrescence. There's no beauty here, only death and decay.
You can't really believe that?
Everything good dies here, even the stars.
Also, another one of the directors who worked under Luton was Mark Robeson, and he made a film called The Seventh Victim. Now, this could be seen as the precursor to Rosemary's Baby. And in fact, if you said to me on any given day, would you rather watch Rosemary's Baby or The Seventh Victim? I'm saying Seventh Victim. Why? This is a dread-filled film. This is just obsessed with death.
One night a man came in, tiptoeing in. I had a scissors in my hand. I struck at him. I ran away. He was lying in the hall. Blood around him.
Your sister, Mary, is a murderess.
I don't believe it.
You go back to school and forget chocolate.
Drink it, Jacqueline. There's nothing else for you to do. The day you've got to die.
And it's all about a satanic cult in Greenwich Village in New York in the 1940s, all filmed with the most stark film noir lighting, just chiaroscuro, blacks and whites, but it's also got that thing that Rosemary's Baby has, where the Satanists are just normal people. Now, one thing the film doesn't do is it doesn't address any, are they really supernatural, connected to the supernatural? It doesn't answer that question. Doesn't have to. By the time you're done, the last scene in the movie just makes you feel like, ugh, this is just existential dread. Absolutely horrifying movie. But again, like most of these movies, these aren't big, wow. A lot of people today seem to think that horror films have to have a lot of gore and bloodshed or make you go, eh. But these films, many of these films have a dread that comes over them. And this eeriness, this what the Germans call unheimlich, the uncanny. Not the uncanny valley, but the uncanny. And this sense of being like, well, not at home, being disconnected from things. It's, being something that's real but weird, in the real sense of the word weird. Let's jump up to 1960. In April of 1960, several months before Psycho, came my favorite film from 1960. It's a French film called Eyes Without a Face, in English, Les Yeux Sans Visage. It's directed by Georges Franju. Georges Franju also directed probably the darkest documentary that's ever been filmed, called Blood of the Beasts, Le Sang des Bêtes. That documentary, which is included on the DVD and Blu-ray of Les Yeux Sans Visage, it's all about a stockyard. It's all about an abattoir. It's all about animals being killed. And that's what you see in the film over and over and over. He's saying, yeah, this is terrible, death. But he's also saying, look at these sheep writhing around. Isn't there a kind of surreal beauty to it? But Eyes Without a Face, not to put too fine a point on it, but it's my second favorite film of all time. Second or third. I haven't done a list in quite a while, but it's in the top 3. And wow. It is a film that deals with horror. I first saw the film. I'd heard about it for years, but could never find a copy to watch, never knew when to see it. But finally they restored it. And it was about, 1989, 1990 it showed at the Film Forum. And I've never seen the following thing happen. Now, of course, the Film Forum crowd in New York City, you've got, the cool people, the scenesters, the movie people, though they weren't quite movie geeks yet. Geek is a more modern term. But you've also got people who brought their friends. So they're watching it. And there are scenes in the middle of the movie where half the audience is laughing, very nervously, I might add, and the other half is screaming. Because that film has some images in it that are still powerful today. And to me, one of the things I love about this film is the way it mixes horror and beauty. Today, we would call this a body horror film. But I think it's more of a deformity film. And I have a discussion of what horror genres are, where I discuss the difference between a deformity film and a body horror film. But I'm not going to go into it except to say amazing acting, great score by Maurice Jarre, and Alida Valli and Pierre Brasseur do great jobs in their things. But for me, it comes down to Edith Scobb, who is the main person. She has to wear this blank mask all the way through, except for the moment she takes it off, which is where the horror comes in. But at the same time, the film ends like a fairy tale. Definitely influenced by Jean Cocteau and Beauty and the Beast, but absolutely amazing film that essentially the film is about beauty and horror. I can't recommend this film highly enough. And then we go up to 1965, and this is the other really obscure film that I'm amazed that no one ever talks about this. It was voted in Poland as the second greatest film, Polish film of all time. This was in 2015, the last poll they did on these things. And it's called The Saragossa Manuscript, or the name of the novel by Jan Potocki translates into something like The Manuscript Found in Saragossa. And it was written in 1815, the original book. But this is one of the strangest films of all time. Now, it has this weird sense, and the Poles do this, I think, more than anyone. There's kind of a light sense of humor sometimes, followed by just the creepiest stuff in the original sense of the flesh-crawling word as well. And so you have people, like, there's scenes of people talking under gibbets where skeletons are trapped. One of the things that gets me about this film, this is what makes the film to me. It starred Zbigniew Cybulski, who is always mentioned as the Polish James Dean, but he had this kind of anti-authoritarian character. He was born in 1927 or so, and died in 1967. So he's only about 40 years old when he died. And he was in Andre Vida's 3 great World War II classic films, Generation, Ashes and Diamonds, and I'm forgetting the other one. But great actor in great films. But he plays the main character who's wandering through this Napoleonic warfare landscape in Spain, although it's all shot in Poland. And here's the thing this 3-hour movie does, and it's divided very neatly in half, that no other film has ever come at all close to it. This is what makes me love this film the most. Is the first part of the film is a dream within a dream within a dream. And the second part of the film, you find these strange characters like the Kabbalist and the Gypsy and these very mythic, almost tarot card kind of figures who are telling stories. And there's a moment where they're telling a story within a story. So they're telling a story, and inside the story, someone else is telling a story. And at one point, you're 5 stories in, and then they all start to resolve. And when you realize how deep you are into stories within stories within stories, it just takes your breath away.
Sądzę, że chętnie posłuchacie przygód mojej młodości. Niektóre są zadziwiające. Mógłbym nawet poczytać je za cudowne. Ile razy przenoszę się wyobraźnią w te odległe czasy mego życia. Słyszę zgiełk rozmaitych namiętności i pomieszaną wrzawę burz.
And like I say, this film is this a horror film? I think it is, but I think a lot of people wouldn't say so. But it's certainly dark and mysterious. And I would highly recommend this film. It's hard to find. And you need to find a version. Actually, I think there is a version on YouTube. Again, download it. Don't watch it with any advertisements blocking the way every now and then. And again, don't watch this with people who want to laugh, even though there are comical parts to this. Because you need to pay attention. Because this film is so intelligent. If you're not paying attention, you won't realize when one of the characters starts a story and fades into another story within the story. You got to pay attention to this. And at the same time, once you get the implications of all these dreams and stories, it is overwhelming. And who are some of the people who love it? Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead liked the film so much that he helped to sponsor a restoration of the film, which had been only seen in shorter versions. And Martin Scorsese continued it. He loved the film. Also Francis Ford Coppola. But of course, the person who loved this film the most, David Lynch. He said, oh boy, that's quite a film right there, because he out-lynched Lynch. And I'm sure many of David Lynch's weird storytelling techniques, he watched this film and said, I don't know if I can even get near that. I've always thought I would love to do a story like that is so story within story within story. But let's do the final one, and the final one is Roman Polanski, who these days is it's like everyone says, Roman Polanski did this terrible thing back in the 1970s. And I'm saying, do you think people cannot change? Do you think people are always who they were at one moment in their life? And my answer is no. Otherwise, all of us would be condemned. And maybe we all are, because these days, there's no idea of redemption. People just think, if we found a post that you made 10 years ago on Twitter, that must be who you are now. And so Roman Polanski is always, everyone's saying, I don't like Roman Polanski. I'll give you a hint. Roman Polanski is one of the greatest filmmakers who ever lived. And if you know, not that he hasn't made some bad films, but if you watch The Pianist, this is made by a man who has probably, you know, changed from who he was in the 1970s. However, even saying that, Rosemary's Baby, Repulsion, Knife in the Water, Chinatown, his version of Hamlet, which was made right after his wife was sacrificed by the Manson family, is like Macbeth as the Manson family. It's just really strange. And the first film he made after escaping America is this next film. It's called The Tenant. It's in English, but it was made in France because the French take a different attitude than the Americans on many things. And so he went there and made to me, one of the most unnerving films of all time. Now, some people will watch this. If you're one of those people who think horror is lots of gore and a certain kind of, soundtrack and, all of this stuff, you're not going to find The Tenant that interesting. Also, because you're probably watching it on your phone or watching it with friends and being disturbed, and you're not paying attention. Because if you pay attention to this film, this thing gets under your skin. This is actually the only film on the list that's actually in color. And all I can say is when I saw this in the theater. I was so fortunate. When I saw this film, it wormed its way into my head. There are images in here that I have never seen anything like. There's a bit of Egyptology in here and a bit of mummy stuff, wrapped faces. There is a hole in a wall and a man looking out and finding strange things inside the wall. There is a dream sequence that, in a sense, starts the film and ends the film with a man screaming. I won't tell you why. But this is dark. And I think what this film, and because Polanski's Polish, he also throws these weird offhanded moments of humor in there as well. Again, go back to Saragossa Manuscript, or see Roman Polanski's Pardon Me, But My Teeth Are in Your Neck, which is, I think, the full title, but was it The Vampire Hunters or something? I've forgotten the non-official word that it was sold by. But Vampire Lovers? No. Anyway, apart from the fact there are moments of humor, there are moments of just eeriness and dread.
I knew there was something wrong with him the first time I saw him.
Oh, God, Monsieur Trotkowski. Be reasonable. Wait for the ambulance.
You gang of killers! I show some blood.
And I think what Roman Polanski was doing was confronting the darkness within him in this film. Not that he had solved all his problems, not that he had asked for forgiveness, but I think this film is about what a man feels like who has committed some acts. I think there were more than just what we know about. That, he got involved with the whole Playboy philosophy, which is not too far off from the P. Diddy, Puff Daddy philosophy. And there are a lot of actors in Hollywood. I mean, if you want to start a list of people who have done horrific things, particularly sexually, but also just extortionately, we're holding your career over your head unless you do X. This is Roman Polanski working on the darkness of his soul, and you feel it in this film.
Simone, you do recognize me, don't you? It's me, Stella. Your friend, Stella. Don't you recognize me?
So, I'm going to stop there. If you found this interesting, what films made before, say, the 1970s or before, do you find unnerving? I'm not talking, the kind of thing, well, people today will look at something that I consider perfectly innocent and find it creepy, like old videos of clowns on a commercial, McDonald's commercials and stuff. If that's you, do you know old stuff? If you don't, watch some of these films. Okay. I'm feeling good. Anyway, list some of your the films that you find weird or interesting, films that hold up from the past, in more than just a geeky kind of way, that are genuinely unnerving from the distant past, what is now the distant past. More than 50 years old. That's a good way of putting it. And if you want more of these, let me know, and I'll make another 10 at some point. Okay, well, thanks for watching, and remember, I don't make any money doing these videos. That is, say, from any direct source. I don't make money from YouTube. I don't make money from Patreon. I'm looking into Patreon now. I do have a book of my puppet plays that I'm going to put on sale. There's only a few of them. So if you want one, start thinking about it, because I'm going to put them on sale very soon. But I need help supporting my low rent lifestyle here in Georgia. Even here, it's tight. So, but if you can't help, I understand. It's tight for a lot of people right now. And here's what you should do then. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Have you done that yet? You should hit like. Do everything you can. Leave a comment. Because all of this stuff helps the damned, and they really are damned, algorithms, to find me. We are being manipulated by forces beyond our control. Forces we created. So, from Georgia, this is Bern from Tbilisi saying, Draw a beat, which means temporarily, we will meet again soon, and Nochwamdis, which is goodbye.
When I go, I want you to give me 5 minutes. I told you boys I'm no escape artist. For the first time, I like the odds.
At the round earth's imagined corners, blow your trumpets, angels, and arise, arise from death, you numberless infinities of souls.